Are you a parent navigating the complexities of co-parenting, family court, or even domestic violence? If you are looking for ways to help protect your children and build a strong and supportive community around you, then look no further. Gray Minds Think Alike is your go-to resource for everything related to the complexities of family life. Join us as we dive into thoughtful conversations with experts and explore practical tips and strategies for tackling the challenges of parenthood in the throes of adversity so that no parent feels alone and every child's safety is protected. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Gray Minds Think Alike. I am your host, Kessler, and today I'm speaking with Leah Vejzovic, the regional manager of the Safe and Together Institute, a program developed to help create systems and practice change that are child-centered, keeping children safe and together with a protective parent. Thank you so much, Leah, for joining us today. I know we met, probably like a year ago. We were on a panel. Thank you so much. It's so great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I guess we'll just start. I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about your background, how you got involved with the Saving Together Institute and domestic violence in general.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And again, thanks for having me here. I think we were on a panel with a university in Florida talking about kind of changes in the state of Florida. So yeah, great to connect with you again. Yeah, so I actually got involved in domestic abuse work. I wouldn't say a fluke, but a little unintentionally. I had been doing child welfare work and had been working in residential treatment and therapy with children, and then needed to do another internship in a different area and came across my local domestic violence advocacy program and was really interested in and started doing sort of intern advocacy work as a result. And doing that work, direct work with survivors, advocating for them, helping them advocate for themselves, developed a passion for sort of larger system work. I was seeing a lot of the barriers that were created for them seeking and gaining safety and maintaining that were within larger systems.
Right.
And so as a result, I started working for my home state of Iowa's Department of Human Services as their domestic violence response coordinator. So then went back to child welfare to do that work. But I have experience, as I said, in residential treatment. I've done therapy with survivors, with child survivors, with perpetrators. I mentioned advocacy. I've done men's behavior change programming. I was a caring dads facilitator. Yeah, and really an international level with the Safe and Together Institute, helping change systems. But interestingly enough, I feel it's important to say, long after I had done advocacy work and was in systems change work, I was in a relationship where I was a survivor of domestic abuse. So I've actually talked not a ton, but some about what it's like to be a professional doing this work and to experience coercive control in the midst of that. So that, of course, also only strengthened my passion for this work and my desire to work specifically at the intersection of domestic violence and child welfare.
Got it. Yeah, most people that I've spoken with are survivors themselves. So it's very common to want to pay it forward.
Yeah, I think we create a false dichotomy of professionals and survivors when in reality, so many professionals have had lived experience, whether that's in their past or even if it's something they're dealing with currently. So I always try to recognize any room I'm in that there are professionals, but there are also survivors, and that there's not to create this sort of false separation between those groups.
That makes sense. So I guess if you can just explain the Safe and Together Institute, what it is, who attends, who it's for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best. The best way to really summarize it, my elevator speech of it is that we do international systems change work related to domestic violence and domestic abuse. And I'm the North America regional manager, so I get to work with our partners here in North America, but I have colleagues in the UK and Europe, as well as in Australia and other parts of the Asia Pacific. So Safe and Together is a model of framework for working with families, for engaging and partnering with survivors, for engaging and holding accountable perpetrators, all for the sake of child well-being and child safety. And we really got our start in the child welfare realm, but over the last 20 years have really realized the applications and really have had our partners say this work applies to family court systems, it applies to mental health providers, substance abuse providers, educators. So we've really expanded into these other sectors that intersect with child welfare. So we provide a way of doing that work that really supports survivors, focuses in on perpetrators as the source of the risk and harm, and really identifies impact on children beyond just seeing or hearing domestic abuse. We do training, we do organizational assessment, we do consulting, we have e-learning.
So how do people find you, or who hires you, or how do you work? Do you work with organizations? Do you work with nonprofits?
All of the above. Sometimes we are contacted by a state child welfare agency that says, we know we have some work to do, or we know there are some gaps in the ways that we do this work. We really want to skill up our workers and maybe our community partners. Sometimes we have nonprofits or NGOs reach out and say, this is really an area of need, but we don't see our formal statutory systems coming forward. So we want to come forward and try to get some grant money and try to invite and encourage them to go along on this journey with us. And so sometimes it's also started up or initiated by other partners within a community, and really is very multidisciplinary. As I mentioned, we often find our way there through the child welfare system, but really see the best outcomes when DV advocates are present, when providers are present, when family court system players are also involved in training and using the tools and things like that.
So it's like a school.
Yeah, I mean, we're called the Institute, but really we do all sorts of work related to that systems change. So sometimes that means meeting with leadership and talking about, this is where we see gaps in the way that you're doing this. Sometimes that means doing face-to-face training. Sometimes that means doing some assessment and maybe some e-learning.
Who creates the curriculum or what you're teaching?
Yeah, so it's created internally. David Mandel is the creator of the Safe and Together model. And then all of us staff contribute to creation and edits and upkeep of the model, which are professionals.
What is the model? Is there like a definition?
Yeah. So the model is basically an approach and a framework to domestic violence, working through domestic violence cases. So the three sort of principles of the model are keeping children safe and together with the non-offending parent. The second is partnering with survivors as the best source of information about child safety, as a person that's been keeping those children safe, as a person who can tell us about the perpetrator's pattern of behavior and how that's impacting the family. And then the third principle is to engage with perpetrators and to actually go out, work with them, engage them in behavior change as they are the source of the risk and harm. So it's really about flipping. It's about a shift from focus in on survivors who are often moms, and what are they doing, and are they engaging in this process, are they attending therapy, are they going to substance use treatment, and shifting back to say the person who's creating the risk and the harm in this situation is the perpetrator. So we need to be knocking on their door, calling their phone over and over again, engaging them with services, having really clear consequences when they don't do that, not giving them access if they can't show behavior change. It's really about flipping that script and where we focus, which to survivors and advocates is very logical. Yes, please focus in on my partner who's engaging in this behavior, but that's not how our systems have always functioned, unfortunately.
Right. That's definitely true. What are some, I guess, since you've started, what have been some changes, positive or not, that you have seen over the course of your career when it comes to training?
Yeah, I feel like it's always one step forward, two steps back.
I agree.
In this world. Yeah, and I'm sure you've had that experience, and other professionals have shared that. I think we have taken steps in moving away from a failure to protect model in terms of how we interact with survivors. We've seen states actually stop using that language, put policies in place that are set up ideally to not hold survivors responsible for perpetrators' behaviors. So I have seen shifts within systems really away from that language and away from working in that way. On the flip side of that, we see in family courts the use of concepts like parental alienation against survivors. And so we can see shifts in one system, and then unfortunately, as parts settle, we can then see more domestic violence destructive, is how I would describe it, behaviors in those systems as well. And I've been doing this work for over 20 years now. And so I've seen a lot of moments of hope, and this is a great bill, this is a great law, or there's funding coming to agencies for certain training or shifts in the way that they're practicing. But also, unfortunately, it's not always positive. And sometimes those well-intentioned trainings or policies have unintended consequences, and they actually can have harmful impacts on survivors. The other piece I would say is that I feel like I've seen a shift in focus on perpetrators and engagement with perpetrators.
Okay.
But that hasn't also always been coupled with giving survivors credit for all of the efforts they engage in order to keep their children safe, and the context in which they are living, the day-to-day life of a survivor, in all of the behaviors that they're engaging in to try to protect their children. So I think we're doing a better job of focusing in on perpetrators, but we haven't quite gotten there in terms of really acknowledging all of the work that survivors do to keep their kids safe.
So if, let's say, legislation was introducing a new bill in Florida or wherever, whatever state, could they reach out to your organization to some feedback on the bill and how maybe it could be modified to be improved or things like that?
Yeah, so we've had outreach from some folks before that are doing legislative work. I'm always happy to look at things and say, from my perspective and from the work that I do, you'd want to make sure and include this. Or we hear a lot from professionals or from survivors that this is a real issue, so you'd want to include that. We also have had folks reach out to us. There's been a fair amount of legislation around training for judges and other family court professionals.
Yes.
We've also been in contact with people around, okay, what if this passes or it has passed? Now we have to connect this legislative body with people who are educated on this topic and are going to be able to create training that's actually relevant and helpful. So we've also had some conversations and done some of that.
So I relate to that so much because we got Grayson's Law passed here in Florida last year. But since then, I would say judges and lawyers and gals and mediators are not very well versed in what Grayson's Law is and how to apply it. I've heard from different people that said that Grayson's Law saved their child's life, and then I've had some people say that the judge had no idea what it was and just threw it out. So I know for something like that, training is super important, and getting the right people involved and trained is, I think, the hardest part. How do you get those judges and those lawyers to do the training?
Yeah, so many ways. So we go to conferences across the country. I'm always applying to get in front of judges and other family court professionals. I would say we get a fair amount of interest from that. Someone sees a workshop, someone sees a keynote address and says, this might be something that we need. The unfortunate reality, as you highlighted, is that training or that bill is only as good as its actual application. And so you imagine the people who might really need some of this information also aren't those who are saying, man, I'm really not doing very well at this. I need to get additional training. So that's always the struggle, is that we have judges and family court professionals that are really keen to learn how to do something differently.
You would think they would want to be the best they can, considering children's lives are in their hands. But I have met many judges that do not think that way.
Don't feel that way. Yeah. And so that's always the trick, is that we have people who come to the table and say, yeah, I want to learn something more. I'm having a lot of light bulb moments in how I'm going to do things differently. But unfortunately, oftentimes the folks that really need that information aren't the ones who are reaching out to me and emailing me and calling me and saying, please come and share about how you're doing this work better.
Have you gotten any like success stories? Like people come back to you and say, I just want to thank you so much because XYZ.
Yes. One of my favorite stories is about a judge out of Nebraska who attended a Safe and Together core training. So we have a core training that's a 4-day training that really gets into the nitty gritty of documentation and interviewing and like, how do you really do this work? And he showed up as a participant, had been invited by the local group that was sponsoring, didn't know much about the model, wasn't invested at that moment, and sat through the training and basically had a personal epiphany that he had done things that were damaging to survivors. Had the ability to talk about that in the training, to say, I'm having a personal moment. I'm realizing I haven't been doing this work the best way that I can, that I've probably caused harm as a result of that. They had done 2 days of the training one week, and he came back for the second 2 days the following week and said, I immediately changed the way that I am talking to survivors. I actually have a mom in my courtroom who I apologize to, who has been involved with the system and in my courtroom a lot, that I said, I have not been doing this right. I haven't been asking the right questions. I haven't been giving you credit for all of the work that you're doing. I've been focusing in on your substance abuse or your mental health issues and not focusing in on the person who is exacerbating those issues by abusing you. So just really had a light bulb moment and then immediately changed the way that he was doing work. And he really got fired up and has been really trying to do work to spread that to his colleagues in the family court across the state. He's done some presenting at other national conferences and things.
I wonder what it is. I know you said he changed the focus to the other side, but aside from that, what do you think just really popped in his head when he was like, wait, let's actually look at the abuse that's going on aside from, like you said, the mother?
Yeah. I think a lot of light bulb moments for people when they're learning about the model or getting training in the model is around the way that our systems have always done things and a lack of questioning of that. So we've always put in safety plans that survivors should get protective orders and they should call law enforcement and to keep the perpetrator away from the children. And these are things that are a part of the day-to-day, what they're doing in their documentation and paperwork. And the model challenges and says, if she's called the law enforcement in the past and there was physical harm as a result of that, payback for that, or if the chief of police is her abuser's brother, how is calling law enforcement going to be effective? Or if she's experienced all of these behaviors, so we do something called mapping perpetrator patterns, which is where we put down everything, all of the little day-to-day behaviors, all the physical abuse, all the coercive control, all the emotional abuse. And we map that out. And we say, if this is what this person is experiencing, how are we expecting them to keep their partner out of the home or from walking in the door or from showing up at school? So it's really, I think people have a lot of light bulb moments about they can't do that. Why are we putting that expectation on survivors? And it really serves perpetrators to focus in on survivors, to put our attention on them. Then they get to 6 months on their parents' couch or with a friend, avoiding child welfare engagement, and neither harm nor foul. After they're gone, they can re-enter and utilize their coercive control again. And so
do you believe abusers can rehabilitate?
I do believe it's possible. I think that it takes a lot of work.
I think admitting that you have the problem is the problem.
Yeah. Admitting the harm, admitting the problem, admitting the behaviors, admitting the harm, and then really engaging in a process to change behavior is much different than showing up to a class or going to therapy and talking about your childhood trauma. It's about owning those behaviors and recognition that they've caused harm and committing to making that behavior change. And I have had the pleasure of working with people who have done that, but we as systems have to put the pressure and say, no, you're still behaving in an abusive and coercive way, so you can't have access to your children. We have to say, here's all the ways that you've harmed your family, so we're not going to move on and just because you completed your class, say that everything's okay. We have to change the way that we hold folks accountable and the way that we're messaging and framing things as this is your problem. You have a responsibility to change your behavior, or you can't be involved in a healthy way with your family.
Why do you think it's so hard to keep children safe? And why aren't the protective parents believed? I hear these crazy stories. Every story I hear is just tops the last, but I can't believe that I've heard stories where they're like, my child has been sexually abused multiple times and there's physical evidence, medical reports, and yet a judge still would penalize the protective parent. I just don't understand. Do you have any insight?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of why it's so difficult to keep children safe is because we don't believe protective parents. That piece almost answers. I think that, and I sometimes do a workshop called Perpetrator Manipulation of Systems. And I've gotten really passionate about how our systems lack in awareness. And when I say systems, I don't mean individuals, people within those systems. All collectively, systems don't recognize how perpetrators utilize their biases, their gaps, their way of doing business as an extension of their pattern of coercive control. So perpetrators know if I call for a welfare check, even though I've called 6 times this week, that they will still show up at my partner's house, that could potentially be traumatizing for my partner, that I can then call afterwards and say, see, I can send anybody over to your house at any moment, so you better keep your stuff together. That ongoing litigation bringing survivors back into court over and over again, requesting modifications, making up false allegations, refusing to engage at certain points and then coming on board at other points in the nick of time. That perpetrators are very savvy about these gaps in our systems and these ways that they can, like I said, use these systems to continue their coercive control. And until we can be really honest with ourselves about where those gaps are, where our vulnerabilities are, how we are being manipulated by these people, we will continue to utilize these same strategies and without this recognition that's actually harmful and that we're playing into the hand of the perpetrator. So I think for me, it's a major paradigm shift in my mind. Societally, culturally, we have to accept and understand the prevalence of domestic abuse. We have to really understand how it's impacting children every single day, that it is not an incident-based Lifetime movie. Someone is assaulted and everything goes back to normal. And then a few months later, it happens again. This is something that families are dealing with day in and day out that has very significant impacts on well-being outside of this concept of witnessing or seeing or hearing abuse, but that kids are impacted in a myriad of ways with all of these behaviors of perpetrators. So I think we need a huge paradigm shift in terms of the public's understanding of domestic abuse and its impact on children. And then, of course, our system changes and system reforms that are reflective of that understanding. And seeing that survivors are our best partners in this work, that survivors want their kids to be safe. They just want their kids to be free from harm. They might want their child to have a relationship with their partner, or they might not. But overall, their goal is safety and well-being for their children. And we should.
One would hope. Yeah, for sure. One would hope that would be their goal. It's not.
Yeah, I've met a lot of well-intentioned professionals. And when I started doing this work, I can say that I wasn't doing it in the best way possible. I think I run into a lot of people that have really good hearts and want to be doing this work well, but they've been trained by systems who are using old ways of thinking, who are not doing the work in the right way, and they're confronted with this new way of doing things, and that's when they have those moments of, oh shoot, I need to do this better.
I find that happens a lot with maybe older judges or ones that have been in this space for years now and maybe aren't up to date with current trends because things do shift. I know back when I was young, the tender years doctrine was around, and I'd say mothers actually did have more rights, where it's not like that anymore.
Yeah. And we've also really focused in on things like geography and relationship status and not on behaviors. Are they together? Are they not together? Are they living together? Are they not living together? We have to be straightforward, wasted time trying to navigate those things and figure those things out, as opposed to saying, these are the behaviors that are harmful. This is how it's impacting the family. Here are the pathways for this person to change those behaviors. If they don't do it, here's what we're going to do. If they are able to show to their loved ones, the people in their community, that they're making those changes, then here's another pathway or how this could look another way. And unfortunately, it's really hard to make those shifts.
It's also hard to show what behaviors could be really detrimental, like even little ones that you might not think, just a text message that was just insults. When sees, they're like, that's not abuse. That's everyone insults people. But when you look at the pattern and look at all of the big pictures and all of these little details, that's what shows that the escalation that can lead to things. I know that's what happened with me in my case. And I had all these little pieces and red flags, I guess you can call them, which I knew were there, but nobody wanted to believe that they were harmful. And then, of course, once my son was murdered, they're like, okay, maybe we should have listened a little bit more.
Yeah. And you're highlighting exactly what we have: a perpetrator pattern mapping tool. It's part of what's trained in our core training, and we now have a web-based version of that. But the mapping tool is where we say, what are all of these behaviors? Not just the incident that we might be assessing or exploring or that's been brought to our attention, but what are all of those behaviors? What are those text messages? What are the comments that have been said? And actually documenting the specific language. And when we map out all of the behaviors, cumulatively, we can get a much clearer picture of what that pattern of abuse is, and
It's very
therefore can
psychological in the whole grand scheme of it.
yeah. And there's not enough weight given to those, what I call day-to-day abusive behaviors. Again, we're an incident-based, our systems are often very incident-based, criminal justice focused. Was there a physical violence? And if you talk to survivors, if you listen to survivors, I had women sit in my office as an advocate say, I can deal with the physical stuff. I know how to navigate that. It's the
Right.
telling me I'm a terrible mother. It's the
Right.
relentless, no one else is ever going to love you, tearing down who I am and how I look. That's the stuff that really harms. And when you have children in this scenario, they hear those things too. They take that burden on and that harm as well.
Now, are you familiar with Caden's Law?
Yes.
So do you work with them to get some funding for these trainings?
Yeah, we've been approached by a few states who are interested, who are wanting to utilize that funding and now need to build curriculums or identify training that's going to meet their needs. Yeah, we have had outreach from some states about that. I think it's always a slow process of determining who's best to do that and to actually put it all together and put it out into the world. But yeah, I am pleased to see there are states that are utilizing that. I wish it were more.
I'd love for Florida to get involved.
Yes, absolutely. I would like for all states to take advantage of it. To me, it's like this is such a huge problem. And now there's funding through VAWA and
A lot of
Caden's Law.
people don't know that. Even the legislation that I dealt with just getting Grayson's Law passed, they have no idea to this day what all of that means and how it could actually be beneficial when it comes to funding and even just the training curriculum. So I think we need some more awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's already good curriculum and good information out there as well. It's not like you don't have to
Right.
rebuild,
Reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of good resources.
So who should reach out to the Institute and what does one have to do to become a trainer or use the program effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the trainer one first. Professionals who are working with families, so survivors, children, perpetrators, and they don't necessarily have to be child welfare or domestic violence advocacy. If they're working with people who are impacted by domestic violence, who have an organization or agency that would support them as a partner agency, can go through our 4-day core training and then apply the concepts to their work and then apply for our trainer certification program to become a certified trainer and provide that through their organization locally.
Do they need any sort of background? Do they need any prerequisites to do the 4-day training or become a certified trainer?
So not to do the 4-day training, there aren't prerequisites for that, but in our application process, which is pretty, I wouldn't say rigorous, but it's thorough, we really ask people to talk about their experience working at this intersection of domestic violence and children or families. And again, that doesn't have to be formal or just statutory child welfare, but to tell us a little bit about that, to have some kind of background in some sort of teaching or training. And again, that's just to set people up for success. There are situations where people might say, well, I haven't trained it much, but I have all of this experience in this doing this work, and they might be a great fit as a trainer. So
I might be interested actually, because I get people reaching out to me every single day just asking for advice and think how they should handle certain situations. And I'm not sure that I'm equipped to properly give them that. But so that's why I actually do this podcast. So I can give them the tools.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely an option. Like I said, folks have to have a partner agency that's supporting them. We don't do what you do. You have Grayson's Choice. So that would be an option for you. And in terms of outreach to us, I'm always willing to have conversations with folks. Usually it's professionals saying, how do I do this better? What are my options? Can you come to my agency and do some assessment of how we're doing? But I also get outreach from survivors who are doing their own legislative advocacy work or personal advocacy work or family court advocacy work. I've done my best to connect people. Sometimes if that's the case, we don't provide services directly to survivors, but as you've had the experience, sometimes traumatic and tragic events light a fire under you to do advocacy work. And we always want to support survivors doing that and try to connect them with as many resources as possible to do that work.
That's great.
Yeah, we work largely with professionals and leadership, but are always open to sharing information and chatting with folks who are passionate about it.
Okay. That's very broad. And I'm hoping that people that are listening will want to get some more information about the Safe and Together Institute, because everyone could use a good training curriculum and figure out ways to improve. So I really hope that people do actually reach out to make those changes. And again, I
Yeah.
think awareness is key, to know that a lot of people probably don't know that this is even available.
Yeah. And I think that's why I spend a lot of time out in the world trying to talk about the
Outreach.
Institute and the work that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of people just don't know that there are solutions.
There are, yeah.
Maybe they're really struggling locally, and to say that there are ways that we can try to scale up your local professionals to do better.
Okay. I can't wait to see what that brings, because we definitely all need to do better. If you can just plug your contact info or how maybe someone can get in touch.
Absolutely. So you can get in touch through our website, which is safeandtogetherinstitute.com. I won't spell out my email address, but I think I sent it to you to drop in the podcast notes, Allie.
Yes,
I
will.
also shared a link to, I have to plug,
Please.
our CEO's book, which is called Stop Blaming Mothers and Ignoring Fathers, How to Transform the Way We Keep Children Safe from Domestic Violence.
And David Mandel wrote that?
That is written by the creator of the Safe and Together model, David Mandel. He walks through common myths, the myth of child witness, the myth of parental alienation, the myth of failure to protect. So walks through some of these common sort of system myths and really debunks them. So
I always find it so fascinating when men show this work, because it's men-women battles, but it's really not. It's really just about a parent versus a parent. The sex really is not involved. So I always want to make that clear, because women are just as complicit in behaviors as men. But so I just love when I do actually speak to a man, that mindful outlook on both sides.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a really important idea that men be involved in this work, where most often the survivors are women. As you said, that's not always the case. I think one of my favorite things about the model is that it's behavior based. You can map somebody's behavior if they're male, female, non-binary, just the same way as you can anybody else. And when we're looking at behaviors and impact, all of that kind of goes to the wayside. He does talk specifically about how there are often higher expectations for mothers within our system. So that plays a role in how this all plays out. But yeah, and anyway, great book, great resource, but happy to talk with anybody who wants to reach out.
Okay, great. I'm going to have David on just to talk about that book, because I have so many questions.
Yes, definitely. I can definitely connect you.
All right. Sounds good. I appreciate you speaking with us and sharing your insights, and so we can all learn more about the Safe and Together Institute. And I hope we can connect again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you so much, Leah. If there's someone that you want to hear from on this podcast, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you would like to be a guest, please reach out at Allie@graysonschoice.org.